The chandeliers in my parents' dining room had never looked more accusatory than they did that Sunday evening, casting sharp shadows across the mahogany table where my family sat in judgment. I had arrived with a carefully wrapped gift for my sister Vanessa's 32nd birthday, my hands still bearing the calluses from 12-hour shifts at the community center, where I worked as a youth counselor. The gift was modest, a leather journal I'd saved 3 weeks to afford, but I'd chosen it with care, remembering how she used to write poetry in high school before she decided that dreams didn't pay bills. "Still working with those troubled kids, Maya?" my mother asked, her tone suggesting I'd confess to a crime rather than a career. She adjusted the pearl necklace at her throat, the one Vanessa had given her last Christmas, purchased with her husband's credit card. According to YouTube analytics, 99% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. "Your sister was just telling us about the new summer home they're buying in the Hamptons." I smiled, swallowing the familiar ache. "The kids aren't troubled, Mom. They're just growing up in difficult circumstances. And yes, I'm still there. We just secured funding for a new arts program." Vanessa looked up from her phone, where she'd been scrolling through what appeared to be real estate listings, her 3-carat engagement ring catching the light like a weapon. "That's sweet, Maya. Really. But when are you going to get a real job? You're 30 years old." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of discomfort spreading across the table. But it was my father's chuckle, low and indulgent, that truly cut. He'd always favored Vanessa, his firstborn, the daughter who'd married correctly, who lived in the right zip code, who understood that success was measured in square footage and stock portfolios. "Now, Vanessa," he said. But there was no reprimand in his voice, only amusement. "Your sister is following her passion." "Passion doesn't pay the rent," Vanessa replied, setting down her phone with the confidence of someone who'd never worried about money a day in her life. "I'm just saying, at some point, you have to grow up. Look at you, living in that tiny studio apartment, driving a car that's older than some of your students, wearing the same clothes you had in college." She gestured at my simple cotton dress, bought secondhand but clean and carefully pressed. "It's embarrassing." My mother nodded, sympathy and disappointment mingling in her expression. "We worry about you, honey. What happens when you want to settle down? What kind of man wants a woman who can barely support herself?" I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, the familiar cocktail of shame and anger that I'd learned to suppress over years of these family dinners. "I support myself just fine. I'm happy." "Happy?" Vanessa laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Maya, let's be honest. You're a failure. You went to the same college I did, had the same opportunities, and look where we ended up. I married a millionaire. You're babysitting delinquents for minimum wage." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. I waited for someone to object, to defend me, to suggest that perhaps success couldn't be measured solely in currency. But my father was smiling behind his wine glass, and my mother was nodding sympathetically at Vanessa, as if she'd just articulated a difficult truth we'd all been dancing around. "That's enough," I said quietly, standing. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "I'm going to go." "Oh, don't be so sensitive," Vanessa said, rolling her eyes. "We're family. If we can't be honest with each other, who can?" I left my gift on the table and walked out, their laughter following me like a shadow. Vanessa called after me, something about not being able to take criticism, about this being exactly why I'd never succeed. I didn't turn around. The drive back to my studio apartment was a blur of streetlights and swallowed tears. I'd spent my entire life being compared to Vanessa, the pretty one, the smart one, the successful one. I'd stopped trying to compete years ago, had chosen instead to build a life that meant something to me, even if it meant nothing to them. But tonight's humiliation felt different, sharper, as if they'd finally said aloud what they'd always thought, that I was a disappointment, a cautionary tale, a failure. My phone buzzed as I unlocked my apartment door. A text from my mother. "You shouldn't have made a scene. Vanessa was just trying to help." I didn't respond. What could I say? That help didn't usually involve public humiliation, that families were supposed to support each other's choices, that success wasn't a competition with only one winner. They wouldn't understand. They'd chosen their champion long ago, and it wasn't me. 3 weeks passed. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the honest struggles of the teenagers I counseled. They didn't care that I lived in a tiny apartment or drove an old car. They cared that I showed up, that I listened, that I saw them as more than their circumstance. On Friday afternoon, I was helping 17-year-old Marcus prepare for his college entrance essay when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Miss Chen, this is Detective Patricia Morrison with the Fraud Division. I'm calling about your sister, Vanessa Hartley. My stomach dropped. Is she okay? Was there an accident? No accident, ma'am. I need to ask you some questions about her husband, Richard Hartley. How well do you know him? Not well at all, I admitted. I've only met him a handful of times at family events. Why? There was a pause. I can't discuss details of an ongoing investigation, but I would appreciate if you could come to the precinct tomorrow. We're interviewing family members. I went, of course, my mind spinning with possibilities. At the precinct, Detective Morrison was professional but kind, her gray eyes sharp with intelligence. She asked me about Richard's business dealings, whether Vanessa had ever mentioned his work, whether I'd noticed anything unusual. I'm sorry, I said. I really don't know anything. My sister and I, we're not close. The detective nodded, sliding a business card across the table. If you think of anything, please call. And Miss Chen, you might want to prepare yourself. This is going to become very public very soon. I left more confused than when I'd arrived, but the pieces began falling into place over the following days. The news broke on Tuesday morning. Richard Hartley, prominent real estate developer and philanthropist, had been arrested for running an elaborate Ponzi scheme. He'd defrauded investors of over $40 million, using new investors' money to pay returns to earlier investors while funneling millions into offshore accounts. The house of cards had collapsed when a major investor demanded a large withdrawal that Richard couldn't cover. My phone exploded with messages, friends, distant relatives, former classmates, all wanting to know if I'd heard, if I'd known, if Vanessa was implicated. My parents called in a panic. The Hamptons house was in pre-foreclosure. The cars were being repossessed. The accounts were frozen. And Vanessa, who had built her entire identity on her husband's wealth, was facing the possibility of criminal charges as an accomplice. I should have felt vindicated. I should have reveled in the cosmic justice of it all. But mostly, I felt sad. Sad that my sister had tied her worth so completely to money that she was now drowning in its absence. Sad that my parents were scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. Sad that none of them had learned what I'd known all along, that the only success that matters is the kind you build yourself, on your own terms, with your own hands. The first Sunday after Richard's arrest, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice thin with strain. Maya, we need you to come over. It's important. I found them in the same dining room where I'd been humiliated a month earlier, but the atmosphere was entirely different. My father looked diminished, older, his shoulders hunched under the weight of association with scandal. My mother's face was drawn, her pearl necklace, Vanessa's gift, conspicuously absent. And Vanessa sat at the head of the table, her designer clothes still immaculate but her eyes red and hollow. We need to borrow money, my father said without preamble. We've retained lawyers for Vanessa. It's expensive. I sat down slowly, processing. You want me to lend you money? You must have savings, my mother said. You live so modestly, and we're family. This is what families do. The irony was so sharp, it could have drawn blood. I thought of Vanessa's words. You're a failure. I thought of their laughter, their casual cruelty, their absolute certainty that my life was worth less than hers, because my bank account was smaller. How much, I asked. $50,000 to start, my father said. We'll pay you back, of course, once this is all sorted out. I had $53,000 in savings, the result of 10 years of careful budgeting, of choosing beans over steak, of taking the bus instead of cabs, of living in a studio when I could have stretched for a one-bedroom. It was my emergency fund, my safety net, my ticket to graduate school if I ever decided to pursue my master's degree. No, I said quietly. My mother's eyes widened. What? I said no, I'm not lending you money. Vanessa's head snapped up. Are you serious? I'm your sister. I could go to prison. You called me a failure, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. You mocked my life, my choices, my career. You laughed at me. You all did. We were just being honest, Vanessa said. But there was desperation creeping into her voice now. We were trying to motivate you. You were trying to humiliate me, I corrected. And now you want me to save you with the money I earned doing the work you found so embarrassing. The answer is no. My father's face reddened. This is petty, Maya. Childish revenge. It's not revenge, I said, standing. It's self-preservation. I worked hard for what I have. I chose a life that matters to me, even when it meant being alone in that choice. You don't get to despise my life and then ask me to fund yours. I walked out for the second time in a month, but this time there was no laughter following me. There was only silence, heavy and damning. The scandal continued to unfold in spectacular fashion. Richard's trial became a media sensation, and while Vanessa was ultimately not charged, prosecutors determined she'd been genuinely unaware of the fraud. Her social circle evaporated overnight. Friends who'd competed for invitations to her parties stopped returning calls. The luxury lifestyle she'd cultivated disappeared like morning mist. She moved back in with our parents. Her designer wardrobe slowly sold off on consignment sites, each Prada bag and Louboutin pump a small monument to a life built on sand. I didn't gloat. I simply continued with my life, showing up each day at the community center, helping kids who reminded me that resilience wasn't about money or status, but about showing up even when life knocked you down. 4 months after the arrest, I was supervising an art class when the center's director, Patricia, knocked on the door frame. Maya, someone's here to see you. Says he knows your family. I stepped into the hallway to find a man in an expensive suit, probably in his early 40s, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. He looked vaguely familiar. Ms. Chen? I'm James Cartwright. I don't know if you remember me. I was at your sister's wedding. I was Richard's business partner, though I severed that relationship 2 years ago when I suspected something wasn't right. He shifted uncomfortably. May I speak with you for a moment? We sat in my cramped office, surrounded by student artwork and college application materials. I've been following your sister's case, he said, and I did some research on you. What you do here, I mean. He gestured at the walls covered in acceptance letters from kids who'd beaten long odds. It's remarkable. Thank you, I said cautiously, but I'm not sure why you're here. He pulled out a folder. When I left Richard's company, I started my own investment firm. We focus on ethical investments, social impact portfolios, sustainable development, and I've been looking for someone to head our charitable foundation, someone who understands what it means to build something real, something that matters beyond profit margins. I stared at him. I'm sorry, I don't understand. I'm offering you a job, Miss Chen, director of the Cartwright Foundation. 6-figure salary, benefits, budget to develop programs for at-risk youth across the state. You'd be building something from the ground up, creating real change, he smiled. I know you're happy here, but imagine what you could do with real resources behind you. My hands trembled as I took the folder. Why me? Because I've seen what you've accomplished with nothing but determination and heart. And because, frankly, integrity is rare. Your family asked you for money when they treated you terribly, and you said no. You chose yourself. That takes strength most people don't have. He stood. Think about it. No pressure. But I believe you could change thousands of lives, Maya. Not just the kids in this room, but across the entire state. After he left, I sat in my office for a long time, the folder unopened on my desk. Through the door, I could hear Marcus laughing at something another student said, the sound of young lives still believing in possibility despite everything stacked against them. I'd helped Marcus. I'd helped dozens of kids like him. But what if I could help thousands? I accepted the position 2 weeks later. The local newspaper ran a story. Community Center counselor tapped to lead $1 million youth foundation. The article detailed my work, my philosophy, my vision for the foundation. It mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that I was the sister-in-law of disgraced investor Richard Hartley. My phone rang within an hour of the article's publication. It was my mother. We saw the news, she said. That's wonderful, honey. Really wonderful. There was something in her voice. Pride, maybe, or the recognition that she'd misjudged me. But there was also expectation, the unspoken question hanging between us. Thank you, I said simply. So, about the loan we discussed. I closed my eyes. Mom, my answer hasn't changed. But you have money now, a good job. Surely you can. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up and I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The Cartwright Foundation's launch event was held 6 months later in a renovated warehouse downtown, the space filled with educators, community leaders, and young people whose lives had been transformed by programs like the ones we planned to expand. I'd worked 16-hour days to build the foundation structure, to develop partnerships, to create something that would outlast me. I was giving my speech, talking about second chances, and the power of investing in people rather than portfolios, when I saw them slip in through the back door, my parents looking older and uncomfortable in their formal wear, and Vanessa wearing a simple black dress I didn't recognize, her face bare of the dramatic makeup she used to favor. I faltered for just a moment, then continued. I talked about resilience, about the kids who taught me that success wasn't about where you started, but about whether you kept moving forward. I talked about Marcus, who'd just been accepted to his dream college with a full scholarship. I talked about building a life that meant something, even when others couldn't see its value. The applause was thunderous. People wanted to shake my hand, to share their own stories, to thank me for giving voice to something they'd felt but couldn't articulate. I was caught in a current of goodwill and genuine connection, the kind of wealth that couldn't be deposited in a bank account, but that filled something deeper. When the crowd finally thinned, my family approached. My father looked at his shoes. My mother clutched her purse like a shield. But Vanessa met my eyes, and what I saw there surprised me. Not jealousy or resentment, but something like understanding. "That was a beautiful speech," she said quietly. "Thank you." "I need to apologize." She glanced at our parents, who nodded encouragingly. "For what I said at my birthday, for how I treated you, for everything." I waited. I'd learned that real apologies required more than a few words. "I thought I had it all figured out," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I thought marrying rich meant I'd won, that you were the one making mistakes. But I built my entire life on someone else's foundation. And when it crumbled, I had nothing. No skills, no purpose, no idea who I was without the designer labels and the mansion." She wiped at her eyes. "You knew who you were all along, even when we made fun of you, even when we acted like you were less than us. You were always more than us, Maya. You just measured success differently." My mother stepped forward. "We were wrong. We got caught up in appearances, in what the neighbors thought, in status. We forgot what actually matters. And we're proud of you," my father added gruffly. "Should have said it years ago." I looked at them, my family, flawed and human, and finally seeing me, and felt the years of resentment begin to loosen their grip. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, "but I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this for revenge or to prove you wrong. I'm doing this because it's who I am, and I need people in my life who respect that, who don't wait until I have an impressive title to treat me with dignity." "We understand," Vanessa said, "and we don't expect you to just forgive us. We haven't earned that. But maybe we could start over, slowly." I considered. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending the hurt hadn't happened. But it might mean allowing space for growth, for change, for the possibility that people could learn. "Slowly," I agreed. We didn't hug, we didn't make grand pronouncements, but there was a shift, subtle but real, like a door opening just a crack to let light into a darkened room. As they left, James Cartwright approached with a champagne flute. "Family?" he asked, watching them go. "Yeah." "They seem proud." "They are now." I accepted the champagne. But I learned something important from all of this. "What's that?" "That you can't build your worth on other people's approval. Not your family's, not society's, not anyone's. You have to know your own value, even when you're standing alone." He clinked his glass against mine. "To standing alone, then." "To standing alone," I echoed. "Until you realize you're not alone at all. You're just standing with different people." Across the room, Marcus was showing his acceptance letter to another student, both of them laughing with the unguarded joy of young people who'd glimpsed a future they'd been told wasn't meant for them. My assistant, Claire, was deep in conversation with a potential donor, her passion for the work evident in every gesture. The warehouse hummed with purpose and possibility. With the sound of people building something real, I thought about karma, about how it wasn't some mystical force of revenge, but simply the natural consequence of choices rippling outward through time. Vanessa had chosen status over substance and learned that one could disappear overnight while the other endured. My parents had chosen to measure success in dollars rather than dignity and discovered that metric left them morally bankrupt when the numbers changed. And I had chosen to build a life of meaning despite mockery and dismissal, planting seeds that had finally grown into a forest. The next morning, I woke in my studio apartment. I hadn't moved yet, hadn't felt the need to immediately upgrade, and made coffee in my ancient coffee maker. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Started volunteering at a food bank yesterday. Weird how good it feels to actually help people. Thought you'd understand. I smiled and typed back, I do, proud of you. 2 words I'd waited years to hear from them, offered freely now that I no longer needed them. But that was okay. I'd learned to be proud of myself, and that had been enough. I opened my laptop to the Foundation's project proposals, dozens of programs waiting for approval, each one a chance to change a life. Outside my window, the city was waking up. Grocery store clerks and bus drivers and teachers and social workers, all the people doing the work that kept the world turning, that mattered beyond quarterly earnings, reports and stock portfolios. Richard Hartley got 12 years in prison. The investors he'd defrauded were still fighting to recover their losses. The mansion was sold at auction. The Hamptons house never materialized. And Vanessa got a job as an administrative assistant at a nonprofit, learning to build her own foundation rather than borrowing someone else's. My parents downsized, retired quietly, spent more time volunteering at the community center where I'd started. They never asked me for money again, and slowly, over shared cups of coffee and conversations about things that actually mattered, we began to rebuild something that resembled a relationship. But the real victory wasn't their change of heart. It was never about them at all. The real victory was that I'd stayed true to myself when it was hard, when it was lonely, when everyone around me insisted I was wrong. I'd measured my worth by my own metrics and built a life that didn't need their approval to be valuable. And when karma finally came calling, not as revenge, but as the natural result of living with integrity, I'd been standing on solid ground. 3 years later, the Cartwright Foundation had funded after-school programs in 43 cities, provided college scholarships to over 200 students, and launched job training initiatives that helped thousands of young people build sustainable careers. Marcus graduated college and joined our team, developing mentorship programs for kids who reminded him of himself. My studio apartment remained unchanged. I decided I liked it. That space wasn't the same as emptiness. But I'd added shelves for the awards the foundation had won, physical proof of what passion and purpose could build. On a Sunday evening, I hosted dinner at my parents' house. Not to prove anything, but because we'd learned to be family in a different way. Vanessa brought pasta salad from the grocery store, laughing about her tight budget. My parents had made pot roast. I contributed wine and stories about the foundation's latest success. Remember when you called me a failure? I asked Vanessa over dessert, not with bitterness, but with the distance that time and healing provide. She winced. Unfortunately, yes, I was such an idiot. We all were, my mother said quietly. We were so busy measuring the wrong things. The thing is, I said, I'm glad it happened. They stared at me. I'm glad because it forced me to choose, to decide that my path was worth walking even when everyone thought I was lost. And that choice, that refusal to measure my life by your expectations, that's what gave me the strength to build something real. You would have done it anyway, my father said. You're stubborn like that. Maybe, I agreed, but I might have done it while still seeking your approval, still trying to prove something. Instead, I learned to prove things to myself. That's a better foundation. Vanessa raised her wine glass. To better foundations. We drank. To that. To the lesson that karma doesn't always arrive with thunder and lightning, but sometimes comes quietly, as the gentle revelation that you've been wealthy all along in the ways that matter. That the real failure isn't having less money, or a smaller house, or a secondhand dress, but losing sight of who you are in the pursuit of who others think you should be. Later, driving home through the city I loved, past the community centers and schools where our programs were giving kids a fighting chance, I felt something I'd never felt when my sister lived in a mansion. I felt complete. Not because karma had punished those who'd hurt me, but because I'd learned that justice wasn't about their downfall. It was about my refusal to fall, even when they'd laughed. Karma hadn't laughed harder at them. It had simply revealed what I'd known all along, that success built on someone else's foundation will always crumble, but success built on your own terms, with your own hands, with integrity as your blueprint, that kind of success can withstand anything. And in the end, that was the only foundation worth standing on.